The Australian outback in the early 1930s was a place of wide horizons and hard lives. The land stretched on forever red earth, golden grass, and the endless blue of the sky. In the wheat belt of Western Australia, farmers rose before dawn, their hands rough from work, their faces weathered by sun and wind. They had come to this land with hope, dreaming of harvests that would feed a nation and build new lives after the devastation of the Great War. But by the year 1932, hope was in short supply. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Wheat prices had collapsed, and the government's promises of support seemed as thin as the morning mist. The farmers of Western Australia watched their crops with anxious eyes, praying for rain, for good luck, for anything that might turn the tide. And then, as if the land itself had turned against them, another enemy arrived, an army of emus. The emu is a strange and wonderful creature. Standing as tall as a man with powerful legs and curious eyes, it moves with a grace that belies its size. In the wild, emus are shy, but in the wheat fields of Western Australia, they found a paradise. The crops were green and plentiful, the fences easy to slip through, and the land free of predators. In the spring of 1932, more than 20,000 emus descended on the wheat belt. They moved in flocks, their feathers ruffling in the wind, their beaks snapping at the tender shoots. The farmers watched in horror as their fields were trampled and stripped bare. Fences meant to keep out rabbits were no match for the emus, who simply barreled through, leaving destruction in their wake. The farmers tried everything. They built higher fences, chased the birds with dogs, and even tried to scare them off with noise and fire. But the emus were relentless. For every flock driven away, another appeared. The birds seemed to know no fear, and their numbers grew with each passing day. Desperate, the farmers turned to the government for help. They wrote letters, sent telegrams, and pleaded with their representatives. "We fought for this land," they said, "and now we are losing it to birds." The government listened, and in October of 1932, they made a decision that would become legend. The Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, agreed to send military assistance. It was an extraordinary move. Never before had the Australian army been called upon to fight birds. But the farmers were citizens, and their plight could not be ignored. The army would bring machine guns, ammunition, and trained soldiers to the wheat belt. The Great Emu War was about to begin. The man chosen to lead the campaign was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery, Royal Australian Artillery. Meredith was a practical man, used to the discipline of the military and the unpredictability of the bush. He arrived in Campion, a small farming town, with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The local farmers greeted them with a mixture of relief and skepticism. On the 2nd of November, 1932, the first battle lines were drawn. The soldiers set up their guns near a flock of 50 emus, waiting for the perfect moment. The birds, wary but curious, edged closer. At Meredith's signal, the guns roared to life, spitting bullets across the field. The emus scattered in all directions, running faster than the soldiers had imagined possible. Only a handful fell. The rest vanished into the scrub, leaving the wheat fields eerily quiet. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that bring history's greatest mysteries to life. Undeterred, Meredith and his men tried again. They set up ambushes, mounted the guns on trucks, and chased the birds across the countryside. But the emus proved to be elusive foes. They ran in zigzags, split into smaller groups, and seemed to sense danger before it arrived. The trucks, heavy and slow, bogged down in the soft earth. The machine guns jammed, and the soldiers found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The local farmers watched with a mix of amusement and frustration. The army, for all its firepower, was no match for the emus. The birds seemed almost invincible, their long legs carrying them out of range, their feathers shrugging off the occasional bullet. The soldiers, sweating under the hot sun, began to see the humor in their predicament. By the end of the first week, the results were dismal. The army had fired more than 2,000 rounds and killed fewer than 200 emus. The birds, meanwhile, continued to ravage the crops, their numbers undiminished. Newspapers across Australia picked up the story, and soon the world was laughing at the spectacle of soldiers waging war on birds and losing. Major Meredith, ever the professional, filed his reports with honesty and a touch of dry wit. "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds," he wrote, "it would face any army in the world. The emus," he noted, "can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." On the 8th of November, the government called a halt to the campaign. The soldiers packed up their guns and returned to their barracks, leaving the farmers to face the emus alone. The Great Emu War, it seemed, was over. But the emus were not finished. As the weeks passed, their numbers grew, and the damage to the wheat fields became even more severe. The farmers, desperate and angry, renewed their pleas for help. In December, the army returned for a second campaign, determined to do better. This time, the soldiers were more cautious. They moved quietly, set up their guns in better positions, and waited for the right moment. The results were better by the end of the month. More than 1,000 emus had been killed, but it was a drop in the ocean. The birds continued to outsmart and outrun the soldiers, and the wheat fields remained under siege. In the end, the government admitted defeat. The army withdrew for good, and the farmers were left to find their own solutions. Some turned to bounty systems, paying hunters for every emu killed. Others built better fences or tried new crops. The emus, for their part, continued to roam the wheat belt, their place in history secure. The Great Emu War became a legend, a story told and retold in pubs and around campfires, a symbol of the absurdity and resilience of life in the Australian bush. For the farmers, it was a bitter memory, a reminder of hard times and harder battles. For the soldiers, it was a lesson in humility, a reminder that not all enemies can be defeated with bullets and bravado. But for the emus, it was a victory. They had faced the might of the Australian army and survived. Their descendants still roam the outback, tall and proud, a living reminder of the time when birds outwitted men. In the years that followed, Australia changed. The Depression ended, new technologies arrived, and the wheat belt recovered. But the story of the Great Emu War lived on, a sweet and strange chapter in the nation's history. Today, visitors to Western Australia can still see the wide fields and endless sky, the land where soldiers once faced an army of birds. The emus are still there, moving in flocks across the horizon, their feathers ruffling in the wind. And if you listen closely, you might hear the laughter of farmers and soldiers echoing across the years. The Great Emu War is more than a tale of defeat. It is a story of resilience, of the unpredictable power of nature, and of humor that helps people endure even the hardest times. It reminds us that history is not just made by battles and treaties, but by the everyday struggles and triumphs of ordinary people, and sometimes by the most unlikely of foes. So, the next time you see an emu striding across the outback, remember the soldiers who tried to stop them, the farmers who fought to save their crops, and the land that brought them all together. Remember that history is full of surprises, and that sometimes the most memorable victories belong to those who never meant to fight at all. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's most unusual battles, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. There are more stories waiting to be told right here.